The mahogany conference table reflected my face like a mirror as I slid the bank statement across its polished surface toward my ex-husband Marcus. His designer suit couldn't hide the tremor in his hands as he picked up the document, his eyes widening at the seven-figure balance printed in stark black ink. The man who had once laughed at my financial incompetence was now staring at proof that I had been wealthier than him for the past 8 years, and he had never suspected a thing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus's new wife, Vivian, sat beside him, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously against her phone as she processed what this meant for their lifestyle. The lifestyle built on the assumption that I, Elena Chen, was a helpless woman who couldn't survive without her husband's financial guidance. The same woman they had conspired to leave penniless was now their only hope of saving their crumbling real estate empire. The irony of this moment wasn't lost on me as I leaned back in my leather chair, watching the color drain from Marcus's face. 8 years ago, he had sat in a similar conference room, explaining with patronizing patience why I didn't need access to our joint accounts, why it was better if he handled all our finances, why I should trust him to take care of everything. Now here we were, positions reversed, and I held all the cards he thought he had hidden up his sleeve. My story begins not with triumph but with a conversation that changed everything. It was a humid August evening in our Boston townhouse, and I was folding laundry while Marcus reviewed what he called our monthly financial strategy. He sat at our dining table with his laptop open, expensive reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every inch the successful investment banker he portrayed himself to be. "Elena, we need to talk about your spending habits," he said without looking up from his screen. "The charge at the art supply store last week was completely unnecessary. We've discussed this. Your little hobby doesn't contribute to our financial goals." The art supplies had cost $47. I had used my own credit card, the one he graciously allowed me to have with a $1,000 monthly limit for what he called incidental. Meanwhile, his golf membership alone cost more than I spent in 6 months, but pointing that out would only lead to another lecture about networking and business investments. "I'm teaching watercolor classes at the community center starting next month," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "The supplies are for my students. It's a way to earn some extra income." He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of amusement and condescension. "Sweetheart, your little art classes aren't going to make any real money. Why don't you focus on managing the household instead? That's a full-time job in itself, and you know I earn more than enough for both of us." This conversation was a variation of one we had been having for the 5 years of our marriage. Marcus controlled every aspect of our finances with an iron grip wrapped in silk glove. He presented it as protection, as care, as his duty as the primary breadwinner. What I didn't know then was that my grandmother in Shanghai was about to change everything with a phone call that would arrive 3 days later. My grandmother, Chen Meiling, was 92 years old and sharper than most people half her age. She had built a textile business from nothing in the 1960s, survived the Cultural Revolution, and emerged as one of the quiet powers in Shanghai's business community. When she called that Wednesday morning, her voice carried the weight of someone who had learned to trust no one completely. "Little Sparrow," she said, using my childhood nickname, "I need to speak with you about your inheritance. Alone, without that husband of yours listening." I glanced around our empty kitchen, confirming Marcus had already left for work. "He's at the office." "Nai, what's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I am dividing my assets among the family and your portion is substantial, but I have concerns about how it will be managed." My grandmother had never hidden her distrust of Marcus. During our wedding, she had pulled me aside and whispered that a man who insisted on controlling the money was a man planning for a future where he held all the power. I had dismissed her concerns as old-fashioned thinking. How wrong I had been. The inheritance was more than I could have imagined. My grandmother had quietly built her single textile shop into a small empire, investing wisely over decades. My portion came to just over $2 million, a sum that would have seemed impossible to me as I stood in my kitchen wearing a 5-year-old sundress, because Marcus had decided designer clothes were an unnecessary expense for a housewife. But Nai's next words were what truly changed my life. She didn't want the money going into any joint accounts. She didn't want Marcus to know about it at all. Instead, she had arranged for the funds to be placed in a trust with a specific condition. I had to maintain my own separate account that Marcus could never access, and I had to promise to build something of my own with it. Men who control through money will always underestimate women who find their own power, she told me. This is not about deceiving your husband, little sparrow. This is about ensuring you always have wings to fly, should you need them. That afternoon, while Marcus attended his power lunches and important meetings, I took the train to a bank in Cambridge where no one knew me. I opened my first truly personal account in 5 years. The banker, a kind woman named Patricia, didn't ask why my hands shook as I signed the paperwork, or why I paid the small account fee in cash rather than writing a check. Over the following weeks, I developed a routine that would define the next several years of my life. Every Tuesday and Thursday I taught my watercolor classes at the community center. What Marcus didn't know was that I had expanded beyond the announced beginner's class. I was teaching private lessons, running workshops, and had even started selling my own paintings through a small gallery in Cambridge that paid me in cash at my request. The money wasn't much at first, maybe $500 a month, sometimes $800 if I sold a larger piece, but I deposited every penny into my secret account, watching the balance grow with a mixture of pride and guilt. The guilt came from hiding something from my husband. The pride came from knowing I was capable of earning my own money, despite his constant assertions that my art was merely an expensive hobby. Marcus, meanwhile, had grown increasingly controlling about our finance. He had moved from simply managing our money to actively restricting my access to it. The credit card limit dropped from $1,000 to $500. Cash withdrawals required explanation. Even grocery shopping became an exercise in justification, with receipts scrutinized and unnecessary items highlighted with the same red pen he used for his business contracts. "You spent $15 on flowers?" he asked one evening, holding the grocery receipt like evidence in a trial. "Elena, we've talked about frivolous purchases. Fresh flowers die in a week. It's literally throwing money away." I wanted to tell him that those sunflowers brought more joy to our home than his latest unnecessary gadget purchase. I wanted to point out that he had spent $200 on a bottle of wine just the previous night for a client dinner. Instead, I apologized and promised to be more careful, all while mentally calculating how many watercolor workshops I would need to teach to feel like a person who deserved fresh flowers in her own home. The secrecy of my account began to feel less like deception and more like self-preservation. Every deposit was a small act of rebellion against the narrative Marcus had constructed about my financial helplessness. He would often joke at dinner parties about how lost I would be without him, how he had to manage everything because numbers simply weren't my strong suit. His friends would laugh, their wives would give me sympathetic looks, and I would smile while thinking about the growing balance in my hidden account. 6 months after opening the account, I made my first investment, not in stocks or bonds, which Marcus would have noticed through our financial advisor, but in myself. I enrolled in an online business course, paid for with my own money, studying late at night, after Marcus had gone to bed. He thought I was reading romance novels on my tablet. In reality, I was learning about marketing, pricing strategies, and how to build a creative business from the ground up. The community center classes grew from 1 to 4 different sessions. I partnered with local senior centers, offering therapeutic art programs. A counseling practice hired me to run art therapy workshops for their clients. Each opportunity led to another, and my secret account grew from hundreds to thousands. By our 6th wedding anniversary, I had accumulated over $50,000 that Marcus knew nothing about. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about discovering capabilities I never knew I possessed. The woman who had once believed she needed her husband to explain simple finances was now managing multiple income streams, calculating tax implications, and planning business expansion. I kept meticulous records in a password-protected cloud storage account, accessible only from the library computer I used during my supposed grocery shopping trips. The turning point came on a Thursday evening in November. Marcus had come home early from work, which was unusual enough to put me on edge. He found me in my small studio space, the converted spare bedroom he had grudgingly allowed me to use for my art. I was working on a commission piece. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. A landscape for a client who had found me through word of mouth. "We need to talk," he said, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. "About our future, about some changes that need to happen." He sat on the small sofa I had bought secondhand, looking uncomfortable in the space that was entirely mine. The walls were covered with my paintings, the shelves lined with supplies I had purchased with my own money. It was the only room in our house that felt like it belonged to me, and having him there felt like an invasion. "I've been thinking about our financial situation," he began, using the voice he reserved for difficult business negotiations. "With the economy the way it is, we need to be more strategic. I think it's time you gave up the art classes and focused on reducing our household expenses. Maybe take on some freelance bookkeeping work from home, something that actually pays." The irony of him suggesting I do bookkeeping when he had spent years telling me I couldn't understand basic finances was not lost on me, but what struck me more was the calculation in his eye. This wasn't about money. We lived well below his six-figure salary. This was about control, about eliminating the small independence I had carved out for myself. "The art classes are paying," I said carefully. "I'm bringing in about $1,200 a month now." His eyebrows rose in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. "$1,200? That's impossible. How many classes are you teaching?" I realized my mistake immediately. According to what he knew, I was teaching one beginner's class that paid perhaps $200 monthly. I scrambled for an explanation. "I've expanded a bit. A few private students, some commissioned work." His expression darkened. "And you didn't think to tell me about this. Where is this money going, Elena? I haven't seen any deposits into our joint account." This was the moment I had dreaded for 2 years, the moment when my small rebellion would be discovered. But as I looked at his face, seeing not concern but anger at the thought that I might have something he didn't control, my grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "A man who controls through money will always underestimate a woman who finds her own power." "I've been saving it," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Building an emergency fund for my art business, supplies, workshop fees, things like that." He stood up abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged predator. "This is exactly why I handle our finances, Elena. You're not thinking strategically. That money should be in our investment accounts, properly managed. How much have you hidden from me?" Hidden, not saved, not earned, but hid, as if my labor and talent were somehow theft from him. I felt something shift inside me, a small crack in the foundation of our marriage that would soon become a chasm. "About 3,000, I lied, knowing the real figure would send him into a rage. "It's not hidden, Marcus, it's mine. I earned it." What followed was a 2-hour lecture about financial partnership, fiduciary responsibility, and the importance of transparency in marriage. The hypocrisy was staggering from a man who had investment accounts I wasn't allowed to access and business dealings he never discussed. By the end of it, I had agreed to close my separate business account and deposit everything into our joint savings. Of course, I did no such thing. Instead, I opened a second account at a different bank, transferring most of my funds there while depositing $3,000 into our joint account to maintain the illusion. It was my first direct lie to Marcus, and it felt like crossing a bridge I could never uncross. The next morning, he presented me with a new household budget. My personal allowance was reduced to $200 monthly, to teach me the value of financial discipline. The art supply budget was eliminated entirely. I would need to submit receipts for all expenses over $20. It was, he explained with a satisfied smile, for my own good. What Marcus didn't understand was that he had just transformed our marriage from a partnership into a war, and in war, the person who underestimates their opponent has already lost. I smiled, nodded, and began planning my next move in earnest. The months that followed were an education in deception that I never wanted but desperately needed. I became an expert in financial camouflage, creating layers of protection around my growing asset. The watercolor classes continued, but now I was paid in cash, that went directly into safety deposit boxes before being deposited in small amounts across 3 different accounts in neighboring cities. I opened a post office box where bank statements could be sent, checking it during my carefully timed errands. My grandmother passed away that spring, leaving me not just money but a legacy of strength. At her funeral in Shanghai, my relatives whispered about her hidden accounts, her secret investments, the empire she had built while pretending to be just another elderly woman playing mahjong. She had survived by being underestimated, thrived by being overlooked, and conquered by being patient. I finally understood that she hadn't just left me money, she had left me a blueprint. Marcus attended the funeral, of course, playing the role of supportive husband while calculating what additional inheritance might come our way. He practiced his limited Mandarin with my relatives, charming them with his attention, while simultaneously insulting them by assuming they couldn't see through his performance. My cousin Lily pulled me aside during the reception, pressing a business card into my hand. "If you ever need anything," she whispered in Mandarin, knowing Marcus couldn't understand. "Nai told me to watch out for you. This is my private number." The business card was for a financial advisory firm in Hong Kong. Lily, it turned out, had been managing international investments for high-net-worth individuals for over a decade. My grandmother had made sure I would have allies when I needed them most. Back in Boston, life resumed its suffocating routine. Marcus had tightened the financial restrictions even further, implementing what he called a comprehensive household management system. Every expense was tracked in a spreadsheet. Every deviation from the budget required written justification. He presented it as a game, a challenge to see how efficiently we could run our household. I saw it for what it was, a prison built from Excel cells and conditional formatting. But prison guards often become complacent, and Marcus was no exception. He was so confident in my financial ignorance that he never noticed the patterns in my behavior, the art workshops that coincidentally aligned with his business trips, the gallery exhibitions that happened to be in cities where I was supposedly visiting college friends, the online sales platform I had built under a pseudonym, shipping paintings from a rented studio space he didn't know existed. By our 7th anniversary, my secret accounts had grown to over $300,000, through a combination of art sales, careful investment with Lily's guidance, and the quiet multiplication of money that Marcus believed I was too simple to understand. I had also built something more valuable than money, a network of women who understood the importance of financial independence. There was Patricia, the banker who had opened my first account, who now invited me to informal gatherings where women shared financial strategies over wine and whispered warnings about controlling partners. There was Jennifer, a divorce attorney who bought my paintings and casually mentioned that financial abuse was grounds for significant settlements in Massachusetts. There was Elena Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, a therapist who had started referring clients to my art therapy workshops, and who slipped resources about recognizing emotional manipulation between discussions of color theory. These women became my silent revolution, each one understanding, without being told, why I always paid in cash, why I could only meet during certain hours, why my phone was a basic model that Marcus monitored while my smartphone stayed locked in my studio drawer. They taught me about cryptocurrency, offshore accounts, and the beautiful invisibility of properly structured LLCs. What had started as a secret savings account had evolved into a complex financial identity that existed entirely outside my marriage. The facade might have continued indefinitely if Marcus hadn't grown greedy. Success in his investment banking career had inflated his ego to dangerous proportions. He began taking bigger risks, leveraging our assets for speculative ventures that he was certain would triple our wealth. He presented each scheme with the confidence of a man who had never truly failed, who had always had family money and connections to catch him when he stumbled. "Elena," he announced one evening, over dinner, his eyes bright with the fever of impending wealth, "I've found the opportunity of a lifetime. A real estate development project that's going to transform the Boston waterfront. The returns are guaranteed to be astronomical." I had learned to read the signs of his enthusiasm like a meteorologist reads storm cloud. The more certain he was of success, the more likely he was walking into disaster, but I simply nodded, playing my role of supportive wife while mentally reviewing the safeguards I had put in place to protect my hidden asset. The investment required liquidating most of our joint savings and taking out significant loans against our home. Marcus presented the paperwork with a flourish, already filling in his signature on documents that would pledge our entire financial future to a project I could tell was doomed from the start. My art business earnings, meager as he believed them to be, would need to go towards supporting us while our capital was tied up in construction. Of course, I said, signing where he indicated, careful to read every word despite his impatient sigh. But I noticed something interesting in the paperwork. The loans were structured in his name only, confident as he was that I had no assets worth protecting. In his arrogance, he had inadvertently insulated me from the disaster he was courting. That night, after Marcus had fallen asleep dreaming of waterfront penthouses and seven-figure profits, I lay awake planning my next moves. I quietly transferred most of my liquid assets into investment vehicles that couldn't be touched by creditors. I created digital copies of every financial document in our home, building a paper trail that would become crucial later. Most importantly, I began preparing for the inevitable moment when Marcus's house of cards would collapse. It took 8 months for the waterfront project to reveal itself as the disaster I had anticipated. Environmental concerns, permitting issues, and a partner who disappeared with a significant portion of the investment fund combined to create a perfect storm of financial ruin. Marcus came home on a Tuesday evening, looking like a man who had aged a decade in a single day. "It's gone," he said, collapsing into his leather armchair. "All of it. The investment, our savings, everything. We're going to lose the house." I poured him a glass of the expensive whiskey he had stockpiled in better times, playing the part of the shocked and supportive wife. Inside, I felt the strange calm that comes from seeing a long-expected storm finally arrive. While he ranted about betrayal and bad luck, I mentally catalogued the assets he didn't know existed. My secret accounts, now worth over $500,000, the investment portfolio Lily had helped me build, quietly growing in Hong Kong market, the thriving online art business that operated under an LLC Marcus had never heard of. "What are we going to do?" I asked, letting fear creep into my voice. "How will we survive?" He looked at me then with something I had never seen before, genuine fear mixed with a dawning realization that he might actually need me. "I'll figure it out," he said, but the confidence was gone. "I always do, but we'll need to make sacrifices. Your art studio will have to go. The supplies, the classes, everything. We need every penny we can get." I nodded, already knowing that the studio he wanted to eliminate was generating more income than he could imagine. The irony was delicious in its bitterness. The very thing he had dismissed as a frivolous hobby would soon be revealed as more successful than his grand investment schemes. Over the following weeks, I watched Marcus scramble to salvage his reputation and finance. He liquidated his luxury car, sold his watches, canceled memberships to exclusive clubs where he had once held court. Each sacrifice was accompanied by comments about temporary setbacks and future comebacks, but I could see the desperation growing behind his eyes. The control he had wielded over our finances reversed completely. Now he needed my signature for any major decisions, as his credit was destroyed, and assets frozen by creditors. He began asking about my art income with genuine interest rather than condescension. How much did private lessons pay? Could I take on more students? Was there a way to scale the business? I provided carefully calculated answers, revealing just enough growth to seem helpful while hiding the true scope of my success. I increased my visible income from $1,200 to $3,000 monthly, presenting it as the result of desperate expansion rather than the fraction of reality it was. Marcus accepted the money gratefully, never questioning how a handful of watercolor classes could suddenly generate enough to keep us afloat. The marriage counselor he insisted we see, Dr. Patricia Winters, became an unexpected ally. Marcus had chosen her hoping she would help me understand the stress he was under, support him through this difficult time. Instead, she asked pointed questions about our financial dynamics that made him increasingly uncomfortable. "Elena, can you tell me about your role in the household finances before this crisis?" she asked during our third session. Marcus interrupted before I could speak. "Elena has always been more of a creative type. I handled the finances because it wasn't her strength, but she's been incredibly supportive during this difficult time." Dr. Winters turned back to me, waiting. I chose my words carefully. Marcus felt it was best if he managed our money. He had the expertise after all. I trusted him to make the right decisions for our future. The therapist made a note, her expression neutral. And how do you feel about that arrangement now? It was the opening I had been waiting for. Well, I've had to learn quickly. Running my art business has taught me more about finances than I ever expected. It's actually quite empowering to understand cash flow and profit margins. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Yes, Elena has really stepped up. Though of course, once we're back on our feet, we'll return to our normal arrangement. Dr. Winters looked between us. And what if Elena prefers the new arrangement? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus laughed nervously. Well, that's not really practical. My expertise in financial matters is why we've survived this long. Elena's little art business is helpful now, but it's not a long-term solution. Little, even in his desperation, he couldn't help but diminish what I had built. I felt the last threads of loyalty to our marriage snap like overstretched canvas. That night, I made a decision that had been building for years. I contacted Jennifer, the divorce attorney who had been buying my paintings and dropping hints about Massachusetts divorce law. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge, where I laid out the basics of my situation without revealing the full extent of my hidden assets. Financial abuse is a real consideration in divorce proceedings, she explained. Her voice gentle but firm. The fact that he restricted your access to marital funds while making unilateral investment decisions that destroyed your joint assets. That's significant. But I need to ask, do you have resources to support yourselves during proceeding? I smiled, thinking of the accounts Marcus knew nothing about. I've been careful. I can take care of myself. Jennifer studied me with the sharp intelligence that made her one of Boston's most successful divorce attorneys. Good. Because based on what you're telling me, this could get ugly. Men who control through money don't give up that control easily. As I left the meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Another creditor had called. Another asset would need to be liquidated. Another reminder of how thoroughly he had destroyed what he had spent so long protecting from me. But I felt lighter than I had in years, knowing that while he was scrambling to salvage his sinking ship, I had already built myself a lifeboat he couldn't even see. The dance of deception continued for 3 more months as Jennifer quietly prepared the divorce file. I maintained the facade of the struggling artist wife, dutifully handing over my visible earnings, while my true income flowed into carefully protected accounts. Marcus grew increasingly erratic, oscillating between desperate schemes to restore his fortune and dark moods where he blamed everyone but himself for his downfall. The breaking point came on an unseasonably warm Thursday in March. I had returned from teaching an art therapy workshop to find Marcus in my studio, surrounded by my paintings. He had pulled them from their storage racks, laying them out like evidence in a crime scene. My heart stopped as I saw him holding one particular piece, a landscape I had sold for $15,000 through my online platform just the week before. Explain this, he said, his voice deadly quiet. I found the shipping receipt in your drawer, $15,000, Elena, for one painting. How is that possible when you told me your best pieces sell for $500? I had grown careless, leaving the receipt in my studio instead of destroying it immediately. But as I looked at his face, twisted with rage and something darker, I realized this moment had always been inevitable. The secret could only be kept for so long. I've been building my business, I said simply, growing my reputation. That piece was for a collector in California, who specifically sought out my work. He stood slowly, still holding the receipt like a weapon. How much have you really been making? How much have you hidden from me? Hidden. There was that word again, making my success sound like theft. I straightened my shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. I've been making enough to know I don't need your permission to exist anymore. The words hung between us like a declaration of war. Marcus's face flushed red, then drained of all color as the implications hit him. You've been planning that while I was trying to save our future. You were building an escape route. No, Marcus, while you were gambling our future on your ego, I was building something real, something that belonged to me, something you couldn't control or destroy. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist with painful force. "You owe me everything. Your little talent would be nothing without my support. Every painting, every class, every dollar belongs to us." To me, the mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the man my grandmother had seen from the beginning. But I was no longer the woman who had signed over her freedom for the illusion of security. I twisted out of his grip, backing toward the door. "The only thing I owe you is a divorce," I said quietly. "My lawyer will be in touch." The next hours were a blur of motion and decisive action. While Marcus raged through the house making threats and demands, I calmly packed a single bag with essentials. My important documents were already secured in a safety deposit box. My valuables had been gradually moved to the secure studio space he didn't know I rented. All that remained was to walk out the door and into the life I had been building in secret for 8 years. I stayed with Patricia, the banker who had opened my first secret account, for the first week. She lived in a Victorian townhouse in Cambridge, with 2 cats and a guest room that had sheltered more than one woman in transition. Over tea and homemade scones, she helped me navigate the immediate challenges of separation, while marveling at the financial empire I had built in shadow. 8 years, she said, shaking her head in admiration. "You played the long game better than any investment banker I know." The divorce proceedings began with Marcus convinced he would crush me financially. He hired an aggressive attorney known for protecting wealthy men's assets, apparently forgetting that he no longer had wealth to protect. What he did have was rage, and a burning need to punish me for what he saw as betrayal. His opening salvo was predictable. He claimed that any money I had earned during our marriage was marital property, subject to equal division. He demanded forensic accounting of my art business, convinced he would uncover vast hidden assets. What he didn't expect was for me to comply completely, revealing through Jennifer's careful legal maneuvering that my legitimate business income over the past several years totaled nearly $1 million. The revelation destroyed his narrative. Here was documented proof that the wife he had dismissed as financially incompetent had built a thriving business while he lost everything on speculative investments. The art business he had called a frivolous hobby had generated more stable income than his investment banking career. The woman he thought would be broke without him was wealthier than he had ever been. But the true shock came when Jennifer revealed the full scope of my hidden assets during discovery. The secret accounts, carefully documented and legally protected, totaling just over $2 million. The inheritance from my grandmother that had seeded my independence. The investment portfolio that had grown quietly while he gambled with our joint assets. All of it legally mine, protected by the fact that he had insisted on keeping our finances separate when it benefited him. Marcus's attorney tried every angle to access those funds. They argued commingling of assets, financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. Each attempt failed against the wall of documentation I had built over 8 years. Every deposit traced to legitimate income. Every investment made with money that was indisputably mine. Every protection legally airtight because I had learned from women who understood that financial independence sometimes required strategic invisibility. The mediation session where we finally reached a settlement was held in the same conference room where this story began. Marcus sat across from me, diminished in every way from the man who had once controlled my every purchase. His suit was off the rack, his confidence shattered, his future uncertain. Beside him sat Vivian, the woman he had started dating weeks after our separation, drawn by his promises of wealth that no longer existed. The settlement Jennifer had negotiated was more than fair. Marcus would keep the house he could no longer afford, and the debts he had accumulated. I would keep my business, my hidden assets, and my freedom. It was a clean break that left him with the consequences of his choices, and me with the future I had built in secret. But then his attorney made one final attempt. "My client has information about substantial assets that Miss Chen has hidden offshore. We demand full disclosure of all foreign accounts and investments." I smiled, thinking of Lily in Hong Kong and the completely legal investment structure she had helped me create. "Everything has been disclosed according to legal requirements. If Mr. Anderson has specific concerns, he's welcome to pursue them through proper channel." Marcus leaned forward, desperation clear in his voice. "Elena, please, you know I'm facing bankruptcy. That money, some of it came from our life together. Don't you have any compassion for what we built?" What we built. I let the words hang for a moment, before responding. We didn't build anything together, Marcus. You built a prison of financial control while I built a door. The fact that you never noticed the construction happening under your nose doesn't make it any less mine. Vivian shifted uncomfortably beside him, probably realizing for the first time that the wealthy man she had chosen was anything but. I felt a moment of sympathy for her, another woman who might spend years discovering that Marcus's promises were worth less than the paper they were written on. As the meeting concluded and papers were signed, I made one final gesture. Reaching into my portfolio, I pulled out a small watercolor painting I had created the week before. It showed a bird in flight, wings spread against a dawn sky, breaking free from a gilded cage that sat empty below. "For your new office," I said, sliding it across the table to Marcus. "A reminder that not all prisons have bars, and not all prisoners remain captive." He stared at the painting, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You planned this from the beginning, from the moment you opened that first account." "No, Marcus, I didn't plan anything. I simply refused to accept that my worth was determined by your evaluation. Every dollar in those hidden accounts represents a moment when you told me I was incapable of understanding money while I was quietly proving you wrong." The walk out of that conference room felt like flying. 8 years of careful planning, of secret rebellion, of building strength in shadows had led to this moment of complete liberation. The woman who had once trembled while buying art supplies with her husband's permission now controlled wealth he could only dream of. In the months that followed, I dismantled the careful constructions that had protected my assets during marriage. The hidden accounts were consolidated into transparent investments. The business operated under my real name, no longer needing the protection of anonymity. The studio space expanded into a gallery featuring not just my work, but that of other women artists who understood the value of financial independence. Patricia, Jennifer, Dr. Winters, and the network of women who had supported my journey became not just allies but friends. We formed an investment club, pooling our resources and knowledge to build wealth while supporting other women in similar situations. What had started as my secret rebellion became a movement of quiet revolution. Marcus, last I heard, had filed for bankruptcy and was working as a junior analyst at a firm that would once have been beneath his notice. Vivian had left him within months, moving on to more promising prospects. He lived in a studio apartment, taking public transportation to work, experiencing the financial powerlessness he had once imposed on me. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a distant pity for a man who had confused control with love and domination with partnership. My grandmother had been right all along. Men who control through money will always underestimate women who find their own power. But more than that, she had understood that true wealth isn't just about money. It's about the freedom to make choices, the power to determine your own worth, and the strength to build something that no one can take away. Today, my art sells in galleries around the world. My business employs a dozen people, mostly women who are building their own financial independence. The fortune I accumulated in secret has grown into something larger than mere personal wealth. It has become a testament to the power of patience, planning, and the quiet rebellion of a woman who refused to accept that her value was determined by someone else's evaluation. The bank statements I showed Marcus in that conference room were just numbers on paper. What they represented was 8 years of saying yes sir while thinking not anymore. 8 years of accepting limitations while secretly transcending them. 8 years of being underestimated while quietly building an empire. The morning after the divorce was finalized, I stood in my new home, a converted warehouse that served as both living space and studio. Sunlight streamed through massive windows, illuminating canvases that would never need to be hidden or justified. The warehouse studio in Boston's Fort Point district became more than just my home and workspace. It transformed into a sanctuary for women navigating similar journeys of financial awakening. Every Thursday evening, what appeared to be an ordinary watercolor workshop was actually something far more revolutionary. Between brushstrokes and color theory discussions, we shared strategies for building financial independence within relationships that sought to deny it. Margaret, a pediatrician whose husband managed their considerable assets while giving her an allowance smaller than their teenage daughter's, learned to redirect patient referral bonuses to an account he didn't monitor. Susan, married to a prominent attorney who tracked every credit card purchase, discovered the freedom of cash-based businesses and cryptocurrency investment. Rachel, whose entrepreneur husband had built his empire on her inheritance while denying her access to the profits, began documenting every contribution for the inevitable legal reckoning. These women weren't victims, they were strategists, each playing a long game that required patience, intelligence, and nerves of steel. We called ourselves the Watercolor Society, a name bland enough to appear on bank statements without raising suspicion, yet meaningful to those who understood that we were painting new futures with every careful brushstroke of financial independence. 6 months after my divorce, an unexpected opportunity arose that would test every skill I had developed during my years of secret rebellion. Chen International, my late grandmother's company, was facing a hostile takeover attempt. The board, composed largely of traditionalists who had barely tolerated my grandmother's leadership, saw no irony in reaching out to her granddaughter for help saving the company from foreign acquisition. The call came from my cousin Lily in Hong Kong, her usually composed voice tight with concern. The board is desperate, Elena. They've mismanaged grandmother's legacy, and now they're about to lose everything to a consortium that will strip the company for parts. They need capital injection, and someone who understands both Eastern and Western business practices. The bitter part of me wanted to let them fail. These were the same men who had whispered behind my grandmother's back, who had questioned every decision she made while profiting from her vision. But Chen International employed thousands of people, mostly women who worked in the textile factories my grandmother had built with ethical practices rare in the industry. Their futures mattered more than my desire for poetic justice. The flight to Shanghai gave me time to review the forensic accounting reports Lily had secretly compiled. The mismanagement was worse than I had imagined. Contracts with suppliers had been renegotiated to benefit board members' personal interests. Profits had been diverted to vanity projects that served no strategic purpose. The company my grandmother had built through discipline and strategic thinking was hemorrhaging money through 1,000 cuts of corruption and incompetence. But beneath the dysfunction, the bones of her empire remained strong. The factories still produced quality textiles. The distribution networks she had cultivated still reached markets across Asia and beyond. The brand recognition, built over decades of reliability, still commanded premium prices. What Chen International needed wasn't just money, it needed someone who understood how to build value while others were focused on extracting it. The board meeting was held in the same conference room where my grandmother had once commanded respect through sheer force of will. I entered wearing a suit she had commissioned for me years ago, updated by her personal tailor who had kept my measurements on file. The symbolism wasn't lost on the 12 men seated around the mahogany table, several of whom had the grace to look uncomfortable. The board president, Mr. Wei, cleared his throat nervously as I took my seat at the foot of the table, deliberately choosing the chair my grandmother had occupied rather than the visitor's seat they had indicated. Gentlemen, I began in Mandarin, ensuring they understood I was not the American-raised granddaughter they might dismiss easily. I've reviewed the situation. Your options are limited. Accept the hostile takeover and watch grandmother's legacy disappear, or accept my terms for investment and restructuring. The room erupted in protests. Who was I to dictate terms? What did I know about running an international company? How dare I presume to lecture men who had been in business since before I was born? I let them exhaust themselves, maintaining the serene expression my grandmother had perfected during similar displays of masculine insecurity. When silence finally fell, I opened my portfolio and withdrew a single document. This is a letter of credit for $50 million. Available immediately for capital injection. I also have commitments from investment partners for an additional $100 million in phased funding, more than enough to repel the takeover attempt and fund necessary restructuring. The mood in the room shifted dramatically. Greed overtook pride as they calculated what this influx of capital could mean. Several board members leaned forward eagerly, already planning how to benefit from this windfall, which is when I delivered the conditions that would transform their relief into horror. My investment comes with non-negotiable terms. First, the board will be restructured to include 50% women, with candidates selected from within the company's current management. Second, an independent audit will review all contracts and transactions from the past 5 years, with any discovered irregularities resulting in immediate termination and potential legal action. Third, I will serve as interim CEO for 2 years, with full authority to implement necessary changes. Mr. Wei's face flushed purple. This is outrageous. You're attempting a takeover of your own. Your grandmother would be appalled at such disrespect for established leadership. I smiled, thinking of the conversations my grandmother and I had shared about these very men. My grandmother built this company while you gentlemen built your bank accounts. She would be appalled at how you've squandered her legacy, not at my efforts to restore it. You have 24 hours to accept my terms or explain to your shareholders why you chose dissolution over evolution. The meeting ended in chaos, but I knew how it would conclude. These men valued their wealth more than their pride, and my offer was the only one that allowed them to maintain any stake in the company's future. As I left the building, I felt my grandmother's presence strongly, her approval warming me like Shanghai sunshine. 22 hours later, Mr. Wei called to accept the terms, his voice strained with barely controlled rage. The papers were signed within the week, and I found myself at the helm of a multi-million-dollar international company, a position that would have seemed impossible when I was measuring my life in hidden thousands rather than disclosed millions. The first months at Chen International were a battle fought in spreadsheets and boardrooms. Every decision I made was questioned, every initiative resisted, every success attributed to luck rather than strategy. But I had spent 8 years building an empire in secret while someone actively worked against me. Operating in the open even against resistance felt like freedom in comparison. The women I promoted to board positions proved to be the company's salvation. They had spent years watching the mismanagement from middle positions, documenting problems they were powerless to address. Now, with authority to act, they revealed inefficiencies and opportunities that the previous board had been too arrogant or corrupt to see. Lun Wei, who had run the flagship factory for 15 years, showed how simple changes to production schedules could increase output by 30% while improving worker conditions. Zhang Mei, buried in middle management despite her Harvard MBA, identified partnership opportunities with sustainable fashion brands that would triple our premium market share. Wang Li, who had been dismissed as just another accountant, uncovered contract manipulations that recovered $12 million in the first audit alone, but the real transformation came from the factory floor. My grandmother had always insisted that a company's true strength lay in its workers, not its executives. I spent weeks visiting each facility, speaking with seamstresses and supervisors, understanding the daily realities that boardroom reports obscure. What I found was a workforce demoralized by years of being treated as expenses rather than assets. The changes started small: proper air conditioning in the summer heat, subsidized childcare for working mothers, skills training programs that allowed workers to advance beyond entry-level positions. Each improvement cost money that the board questioned, but productivity soared as morale improved, orders were filled faster, quality improved, and our reputation in the industry began to recover from years of decline. 6 months into my tenure, Marcus reappeared in my life through the most unexpected channel. I was reviewing contracts in my Shanghai office when my assistant announced a visitor, claiming to have urgent business regarding Boston real estate investment. Assuming it was related to one of our American partnerships, I agreed to a brief meeting. The man who entered my office bore little resemblance to the confident manipulator I had divorced. His suit, though clean, showed the wear of someone shopping at discount store. His shoes were polished but clearly resoled more than once. The physical changes were less striking than the change in his bearing. The arrogance had been replaced by something I recognized from my own past, the careful movements of someone who counted every dollar. "Hello, Elena," he said, his voice uncertain. "I wasn't sure you'd see me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. maintaining professional distance, my assistant mentioned urgent business regarding Boston real estate. I assume this isn't really about property investment. He shifted uncomfortably, the power dynamic between us so reversed from our marriage that the air itself seemed to acknowledge it. In a way, it is. I'm working for Pinnacle Properties now, commercial real estate analysis. I'm part of a team seeking investors for a Boston development project. When I saw Chen International was expanding its real estate portfolio, I thought, you hoped to leverage our past relationship for professional gain. I finished calmly. That's surprisingly honest of you, Marcus. His shoulders sagged. I need this, Elena. The commission from bringing in an investor like Chen International would be enough to finally get back on my feet. I'm not asking for charity. The project is solid. The returns would benefit your company. I just need someone to look at the proposal without seeing my name and immediately dismissing it. I studied him across the expanse of my desk. This man who had once controlled my access to $50 while making million-dollar decisions with our future. The irony of him sitting in my office asking for the professional consideration he had denied me for years was not lost on either of us. Send the proposal to my acquisitions team, I said finally. If it meets our investment criteria, it will be considered on its merit. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. This is business, not personal. If the project doesn't meet our standards, your involvement won't change that. He nodded quickly, relief visible in every line of his body. Of course. That's all I'm asking for. A fair evaluation. Thank you, Elena. You don't know what this means, but I did know. I knew exactly what it felt like to have your future dependent on someone else's willingness to see your worth beyond their preconception. The difference was that Marcus was asking for professional consideration, while I had been begging for recognition of my basic humanity. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. The business you built, it's incredible. I read about Chen International's turnaround, how you saved all those jobs. I never knew you had this in you. The saddest part, Marcus, is that I didn't know either. Not until you made it impossible for me to remain the person you thought I was. He left without another word, and I returned to my contracts. But his visit had stirred something in me. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition of how completely our positions had reversed. The man who had hidden assets from me was now hoping I would invest those very assets in his success. The person who had declared me financially incompetent was asking me to save his financial future. The Boston project proposal arrived 2 days later. I assigned it to my team with strict instructions to evaluate it without bias, though I privately doubted it would meet our standard. Marcus had never been as clever as he thought, and desperation rarely improved anyone's judgment. I was wrong. The proposal was solid, showing the kind of careful analysis and conservative projections that Marcus had abandoned in our marriage for get-rich-quick scheme. His team had identified an undervalued property in Cambridge, perfect for conversion to mixed-use development. The numbers were realistic, the timeline achievable, and the return on investment attractive without being suspiciously optimistic. Margaret Liu, my head of real estate investments, brought me her analysis personally. This is actually quite good, she said, clearly surprised. The analyst who prepared this understood market conditions, zoning challenges, and realistic cost projections. If I didn't know better, I'd say he learned from some spectacular failures. I authorized the investment, though at a lower level than requested. Chen International would be a minority partner, protected from any downside beyond our initial commitment. It was a business decision, not charity, but I knew it would provide Marcus with the commission he desperately needed. The Watercolor Society continued to meet throughout my time shuttling between Boston and Shanghai. Our membership had grown to nearly 30 women, each at different stages of their journey toward financial independence. Some were still in the secret accumulation phase, carefully building hidden assets while maintaining facades of dependence. Others had recently emerged from divorces or separations, learning to manage wealth they had fought to claim. A few, like myself, were building empires from the ashes of relationships that had tried to limit them. Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist who had first introduced me to the concept of financial abuse, became a regular presenter at our meetings. She helped us understand the psychological aspects of what we had experienced, the gradual erosion of confidence that made intelligent women accept financial powerlessness. Financial control is rarely about money, she explained during one session. It's about power. The money is just the mechanism. When someone controls your access to resources, they control your choices. When they control your choices, they control your life. What each of you has done is reclaim agency over your own existence. Her words resonated deeply as I reflected on my own journey. Every dollar I had hidden hadn't just been about building wealth, it had been about building the possibility of choice. The choice to leave, the choice to stay on my own terms, the choice to become someone beyond my husband's limited imagination. A year into my leadership of Chen International, the company had not only survived the takeover threat, but had emerged stronger than it had been since my grandmother's death. Profits were up 60%. Worker satisfaction scores had nearly doubled. Our contracts with sustainable fashion brands had positioned us as industry leaders in ethical manufacturing. The board members who had resisted my appointment now competed to take credit for having the wisdom to bring me in. But success brought new challenges. Other companies, seeing our turnaround, began aggressive recruiting of our key personnel. Competitors who had dismissed us as a failing legacy brand now copied our strategy. Most concerning, the original hostile takeover group had regrouped with new backing, preparing another assault on our independence. The attack came through regulatory channels this time. Suddenly, our factories faced inspections that found violations in previously approved processes. Our contracts were challenged on technicalities that had never been questioned before. Government officials who had been cooperative became obstinate, demanding documentation that didn't exist, and permissions that weren't required. It was Mr. Wolf, of all people, who revealed the source of our troubles during an emergency board meeting. The Change Group has offered positions to several ministry officials, he reported, his own survival instincts finally aligning with company interest. They're trying to force us into a position where selling becomes our only option. The Change Group was known for acquiring distressed companies, stripping them of valuable assets, and discarding the remains. They had no interest in preserving jobs or maintaining quality. They wanted our contracts, our brand recognition, and our real estate. Everything my grandmother had built would be parceled out to the highest bidders. How much would it take to counter their influence? I asked, already calculating our available resource. More than we have, Zhang Mei replied grimly. They've spent millions cultivating these relationships. We can't match their bribes. Then we don't try to match them, I said, an idea forming. We make their bribes worthless. The strategy that emerged over the following weeks was ambitious beyond anything I had attempted before. Instead of fighting the Change Group's influence with government officials, we would make those officials irrelevant. We would take Chen International public, but not in China where the Change Group's influence was strongest. We would list on the Hong Kong Exchange, with secondary listings in London and New York. Going public would raise the capital we needed, while making us too visible for quiet government interference. International investors and scrutiny would protect us better than any amount of bribery could threaten us. But it would also mean opening our books to public review, revealing the full extent of our transformation and my own role in it. The IPO preparation consumed months of 18-hour days. Every contract had to be reviewed, every financial statement verified, every process documented to international standards. The women I had promoted proved invaluable, their attention to detail and commitment to transparency, making possible what should have been a year-long process in half the time. But the real test came when we began Investor Roadshow. I found myself in conference rooms across 3 continents, presenting to fund managers who controlled billions in assets. Many were skeptical. A Chinese textile company led by an American-educated woman with only 2 years of CEO experience didn't fit their usual investment profile. The breakthrough came in London, during a presentation to Whitmore Capital, one of Europe's most conservative investment funds. The senior partner, Elizabeth Whitmore, interrupted my presentation halfway through. Ms. Chen, your numbers are impressive, but I've seen impressive numbers before. What I want to know is why a woman who built a successful art business in Boston decided to take on a failing textile company in Shanghai. I set aside my prepared remarks and spoke honestly, because I learned that independence isn't just personal, it's generational. My grandmother built Chen International to provide opportunities for women who had none. When it was threatened, I couldn't let her legacy die, not when I had the power to save it. Elizabeth smiled. Now that's a story investors can understand. Whitmore Capital will anchor your IPO with £100 million commitment. The IPO launched on a rainy Tuesday in Hong Kong with simultaneous openings in London and New York. I watched from our trading floor as the stock price climbed steadily, valuing Chen International at 3 times what the Change Group had offered in their hostile bid. By market close, we had raised enough capital to fund expansion for the next decade while maintaining family control through strategic share structures. The Change Group withdrew their takeover attempt within a week, their strategy of forced acquisition through regulatory pressure, useless against a publicly traded company with international shareholders. The government, officials who had made our lives difficult suddenly became cooperative again, eager to support a Chinese success story on the global stage. That evening, as celebrations continued in our offices, I retreated to my private space, a small room adjoining the executive suite where I kept personal items. On the wall hung one of my watercolors from years ago, a piece I had painted during the early days of my secret rebellion. It showed a woman's hands holding seeds, planting them in darkness, trusting they would eventually find light. My phone buzzed with a message from Patricia in Boston. The Watercolor Society had been following the IPO coverage. Watching you ring that bell today made every one of us believe bigger things are possible. Thank you for showing us the way. But I hadn't shown anyone the way. Each woman in our society had found her own path, just as I had found mine. What we shared wasn't a roadmap but a recognition that the journey was possible, that financial independence wasn't just about money, but about the freedom to become who we truly were. The months following the IPO brought a whirlwind of changes. Chen International expanded into new markets, acquired struggling competitors to save jobs, and launched initiatives to support women entrepreneurs throughout Asia. The company my grandmother had built from a single shop became a symbol of ethical capitalism and female leadership in a region where both were often lacking. My personal wealth had grown to levels that would have seemed fantastical to the woman counting dollars in her secret account. But the number that mattered most to me was different: 15,000. That was how many women worked for Chen International, each earning a living wage with benefits and advancement opportunities. That was the real measure of success. Marcus appeared once more in my life, at an industry conference in Boston where I was delivering a keynote on sustainable business practices. He waited until the reception to approach, looking healthier than he had during our last encounter. The real estate project had succeeded, providing him with enough commission to stabilize his life. "I wanted to thank you," he said simply, "for giving the project a fair chance. I know you had every reason not to." I considered my words carefully. Everyone deserves the opportunity to prove they've learned from their mistakes. Marcus, the question is what you do with that opportunity. He nodded slowly. "I've been seeing someone, a teacher." I told her everything about our marriage, about what I did. She made me promise to go to therapy before she'd date me seriously. I'm learning a lot about myself. None of it's pleasant, but it's necessary. I found myself genuinely hoping he would succeed in changing, not for any residual feelings, but because the world needed fewer men who confused control with love and more who understood that partnership meant mutual respect and independence. As the conference continued around us, I excused myself to prepare for a meeting with potential partners for our newest initiative. Chen International was launching a microfinance program for women entrepreneurs, providing not just funding but mentorship and support network. It was my grandmother's vision expanded for a new generation. The presentation went well, securing commitments from several major foundations. As I was leaving the venue, my phone rang with a call from Shanghai. Lin Wei, now president of our manufacturing division, had news that made me stop in the middle of the sidewalk. "Elena, We've just received an offer from the government. They want to present Chen International with the National Enterprise Excellence Award. It's the highest honor a Chinese company can receive. Your grandmother was nominated 3 times, but never selected because she was a woman, I finished. And now they want to give it to another woman to show how progressive they've become. Lin Wei laughed. Exactly. The ceremony would coincide with the anniversary of grandmother's death. The poetry of it is almost too perfect. I agreed to accept the award, not for the government's validation, but for what it would mean to the women who saw my grandmother's struggle, and now witnessed her vindication through the company's success. The ceremony would be held in the Great Hall of the People, where my grandmother had once been denied entry to a business leaders' summit because of her gender. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in Chen International's archives, looking through photos and documents from my grandmother's era. There were pictures of her standing proudly outside her first factory, surrounded by women whose lives she had changed. Documents showing her fight for fair wages when such concepts were radical. Letters from workers thanking her for opportunities they never thought possible. Among these papers, I found something that stopped my breath. A letter addressed to me, dated just months before her death. My assistant confirmed it had been in the files my grandmother specified should be given to me if I ever took leadership of the company. My dearest little sparrow, the letter began in her careful handwriting. If you are reading this, then you have found your wings, and learned to I knew from the moment you married that man, that you would need to discover your own strength. I could have warned you more strongly, could have intervened, but some lessons must be learned through living. The money I left you was never about the amount. It was about planting a seed of independence that no one could take away. I knew you would water it with your tears, nurture it with your determination, and grow it into something magnificent. The company was my legacy to the world, but you, my granddaughter, are my legacy to the future. When they try to diminish you, remember that diamonds are formed under pressure. When they try to control you, remember that rivers carve their own paths. When they try to break you, remember that broken things can be reformed into something stronger and more beautiful than before. The letter continued with practical advice about running the company, insights into board members' weaknesses, and strategies for navigating Chinese business culture as a woman, but it ended with words that brought tears to my eyes. I built Chen International to prove that women could succeed in business. You will lead it to prove that women must succeed in business, not as exceptions, but as equals. The secret account you're building isn't just yours, little sparrow. It belongs to every woman who will follow your example and build her own. All my love and faith. Your Nai Nai. The ceremony, the next day, was a blur of speeches and cameras. Government officials, who had once dismissed my grandmother, now praised her vision. Business leaders, who had tried to destroy our company, now applauded our success. I accepted the award not as a personal achievement, but as a recognition of every woman who had built something from nothing, while the world told her she was incapable. In my acceptance speech, I told the truth that made several officials uncomfortable. This award belongs to Chen Meiling, who built this company despite being denied loans because of her gender, despite being excluded from business associations because of her gender, despite being told repeatedly that women couldn't understand complex finance or strategic planning. I paused, looking directly at the cameras broadcasting to millions across China. She proved them wrong. Every woman who works for Chen International proves them wrong. Every girl who sees this award and believes she can build something significant proves them wrong. The secret to our success isn't complicated. We simply stopped accepting limitations others placed on us, and started building the futures we deserved. The applause was thunderous, though I noticed several government officials clapping with notably less enthusiasm, but their discomfort mattered less than the messages that flooded in afterward from women across China and beyond. Women who were opening their own secret accounts, planning their own escapes, building their own empires in shadows until they were strong enough to step into the light. The Watercolor Society had evolved beyond our Thursday meetings in Boston. It had become an international network of women supporting each other's financial independence. We had created an app disguised as a simple art tutorial platform, that actually provided financial education and connected women with resources for building independent wealth. The tutorials were real, teaching watercolor techniques while embedding lessons about compound interest, investment strategies, and legal protections. Dr. Elena Chen had helped us understand why the art metaphor resonated so deeply. Creating art is about envisioning something that doesn't exist and making it real, she explained. That's exactly what financial independence requires. You have to imagine a different life before you can build it. 6 months after the award ceremony, I received an unexpected call from Vivian Marcus's former girlfriend, who had attended our divorce proceedings. She had found my contact through the Watercolor Society app, not knowing initially about our connection. When we met for coffee in Boston, she looked different from the woman who had sat beside Marcus, believing she had chosen a wealthy partner. There was a weariness in her eyes. I recognized the careful movements of someone who had learned hard lessons about trust. I need to apologize, she began without preamble. I was part of something cruel, even if I didn't understand it at the time. Marcus told me, you were unstable, that you had abandoned him without reason. I believed him because I wanted to believe I had found someone successful who chose me. I stirred my coffee, considering my response. You don't owe me an apology, Vivian. You were lied to, just as I was. The only difference is that I was lied to for longer. She smiled ruefully. He tried the same financial control tactics with me, joint accounts that only he could access, credit cards he monitored, criticism of any purchase he didn't approve. But I remembered watching you in that conference room, how you had built something he couldn't touch. It made me realize I needed to do the same. Vivian had started her own secret account, built her own hidden assets, and eventually left Marcus when his controlling behavior escalated. She now worked as a financial advisor, specifically helping women understand and protect their assets. Her experience with Marcus had become the catalyst for her own transformation. The Watercolor Society welcomes everyone who understands the importance of financial independence, I told her. Your story could help others recognize the patterns before they're trapped by them. As we parted, Vivian asked a question that lingered with me. Do you think he'll ever understand what he lost? Not the money or the success, but the partnership he could have had if he'd seen you as an equal. I thought about Marcus, about the man who had needed to control every dollar to feel secure in our relationship. No, I don't think he will. Understanding that would require him to question everything he believes about power and partnership. It's easier to blame bad luck or other people than to recognize that his need for control destroyed any chance of real connection. That evening, I returned to my Boston studio to prepare for a special Watercolor Society meeting. We were launching a scholarship program for women escaping financially abusive relationships, providing not just monetary support but mentorship and job training. The fund would be administered through a trust, ensuring that no partner or spouse could access money meant for independence. As the women gathered, I saw faces that had become familiar over the years. Margaret, the pediatrician, had successfully divorced her controlling husband and now ran a medical practice where she made all the financial decisions. Susan had built her cash-based business into a thriving enterprise and was teaching her daughters about financial literacy. Rachel had won her legal battle, recovering not just her inheritance, but damages for financial fraud. But there were also new faces, women just beginning their journeys toward independence. They looked nervous, uncertain, hopeful, and afraid in equal measure. I remembered feeling all those emotions as I opened my first secret account, as I made my first hidden deposit, as I built the foundation for a life beyond someone else's control. The topic that evening was investment strategies, but the real lesson was deeper. We were teaching these women that they deserved to own their futures, that their dreams were valid, that their capabilities extended far beyond what anyone else had told them. As the meeting progressed, I noticed a young woman in the back, furiously taking notes while tears rolled down her cheeks. During the break, she approached me hesitantly. My husband tracks every penny I spend, she whispered. He says it's because he loves me and wants to take care of me. But after hearing these stories, I realize it's not love, it's control. I want to open my own account, but I'm terrified he'll find out. I remembered that terror, the fear that independence would be discovered and punished. Start small, I advised. Cash back at grocery stores, selling items online that he won't miss. Every dollar you save is a step toward freedom, and remember, the account isn't just about money. It's about proving to yourself that you can do this. She nodded, determination replacing some of the fear in her eye. I gave her Patricia's business card, knowing that the banker who had helped me open my first account would guide this woman with the same discretion and understanding. As the meeting concluded and women dispersed back to their public lives, I reflected on how far we had all come. The secret account that had started as my grandmother's insurance policy had become a movement. Women across the world were building their own hidden foundations, not because they wanted to deceive, but because they needed to survive and eventually thrive. Chen International continued to grow, now spanning continents and industries, but the company's true success wasn't measured in profit margins or market share. It was measured in the lives changed, the opportunities created, the proof that women could build and lead enterprises that competed on the global stage. I kept my original secret account open, though it no longer needed to be secret. The small balance I maintained there served as a reminder of where the journey had begun. Sometimes I would log in just to look at the account number, remembering the woman who had trembled while making that first deposit, who had seen those growing numbers as her only hope for a different future. That woman had been right to hope. The secret account had been more than just hidden money. It had been the first step in discovering that she was capable of more than anyone, including herself, had imagined. It had been proof that small acts of rebellion could grow into revolutions, that women deemed financially incompetent could build international corporations, that secrets kept for survival could become truths proclaimed from podium. Every woman who opened her own secret account, who made her first hidden deposit, who began to imagine a life beyond financial control, carried forward the legacy my grandmother had started. We were not just individual women building personal wealth. We were a collective force proving that financial independence was not a privilege to be granted, but a right to be claimed. The journey from that first terrified deposit to CEO of an international corporation had taken a decade, but the real transformation had happened in that moment, when I decided I deserved more than the limitations others placed on me. Every woman discovering that truth for herself, opening that first account, making that first deposit, was beginning her own journey toward a freedom that no one could take away. As I looked out over the Boston skyline from my office, I thought about all the women out there, perhaps at this very moment, gathering courage to take that first step. Some would open accounts tomorrow, others would take weeks or months to build up the nerve, but each one would eventually discover what I had learned. The secret to financial independence wasn't about the money. It was about believing you deserved to have it. My phone buzzed with a message from Lin Wei in Shanghai. Another company wanted to partner with Chen International, drawn by our reputation for ethical business practices and female leadership. As I reviewed the proposal, I smiled at the thought of how Marcus would react to seeing my signature on multi-million-dollar deal. The woman he had deemed incapable of understanding basic finances was now courted by Fortune 500 companies, but his opinion no longer mattered. What mattered were the thousands of women who saw my story and realized they could write their own. What mattered was the next generation of girls who would grow up knowing that financial independence was not just possible but necessary. What mattered was the gradual transformation of a world where women's economic power was hidden into one where it was celebrated. The secret account had started as a desperate act of self-preservation. It had become a symbol of possibility, a quiet revolution funded one hidden dollar at a time. And as more women joined this revolution, as more secret accounts transformed into public success stories, the world itself would change. My grandmother had been right. Men who control through money would always underestimate women who found their own power. But she had been right about something else too. That power, once found, would transform not just individual lives, but entire societies. The secret account wasn't just about personal freedom. It was about collective liberation. As night fell over Boston, I prepared for the next Watercolor Society meeting. Tomorrow, more women would learn about compound interest disguised as color theory. more secret accounts would be opened, more journeys toward independence would begin. And somewhere in Shanghai, my grandmother's spirit would smile, knowing that her little sparrow had not just learned to fly, but had taught others to soar. The revolution continued, one secret account at a time. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning. Exactly 10 years after I had opened my first secret account, I was reviewing Chen International's quarterly reports when my assistant knocked urgently on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her expression unusually troubled. "He says he's your ex-husband's attorney." The man who entered my office was nothing like the aggressive lawyer who had represented Marcus during our divorce. This was a young associate, clearly uncomfortable with his assignment, carrying a manila envelope that seemed to weigh more than paper should. "Miss Chen, I'm David Forrester from Brennan and Associates. I'm here regarding Marcus Anderson's estate. There's been an accident." The words hung in the air between us, carrying a finality I hadn't expected to feel. Despite everything that had passed between us, the news of Marcus's death hit me with unexpected force. Not grief exactly, but a strange hollowness where our shared history had lived. Miss Forrester continued, his discomfort evident. "Mr. Anderson updated his will 6 months ago. He left specific instructions regarding certain items that should be delivered to you personally. He also left a letter." I accepted the envelope with steady hands, though my mind was spinning. What could Marcus possibly have left me? We had severed all ties years ago, our last interaction at that Boston conference feeling like a lifetime past. Inside the envelope were 3 items: a small key, a business card for a storage facility, and a sealed letter with my name written in Marcus's familiar handwriting. I set them aside, focusing on the attorney. "How did it happen?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "A car accident on the highway. He was returning from a financial planning seminar in New Hampshire. The police said he fell asleep at the wheel. He'd been working multiple jobs, trying to rebuild his consulting business." After Miss Forrester left, I sat alone in my office, staring at Marcus's letter. Part of me wanted to throw it away unread, to maintain the boundaries I had carefully constructed. But curiosity won, as perhaps Marcus had known it would. "Elena," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably wondering why I'm reaching out from beyond the grave. The truth is, I've been writing this letter in my head for years, never finding the courage to send it while I was alive. The storage unit key enclosed contains something I should have given you during our divorce. Documents, photos, things I hid out of spite, that belong to you. But more importantly, it contains journals I've kept during my therapy. My therapist said writing would help me understand my behavior. What I discovered wasn't pleasant. I was a financial abuser. Those words were hard to write and harder to accept. I controlled you through money because I was terrified of being abandoned, of not being enough. I created a self-fulfilling prophecy, driving away the only person who truly loved me by trying to trap her. The business success you've achieved doesn't surprise me. You were always brilliant, always capable. I just couldn't see it, because acknowledging your strength meant confronting my weakness. I needed you to be dependent, because I was the one who was truly dependent on you. I know apologies mean nothing now. Actions matter, not words. So instead of apologizing, I want to tell you the truth. Your leaving saved both of us. It forced me to confront who I really was, and it freed you to become who you were meant to be. The world needed the leader you became more than it needed the wife. I tried to keep you as. The storage unit contains one more thing: documentation of a trust fund I established 2 years ago. It's not for you. You don't need my money. It's for the Watercolor Society Scholarship Program. Anonymous donations to support women leaving financially abusive relationships. It's funded by every commission I've earned since our divorce. Maybe some good can come from the harm I caused. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your story, our story, changed me. Too late to matter for us, but hopefully in time to prevent me from destroying someone else, the way I tried to destroy you. The letter was signed simply Marcus, with a postscript: "Your hidden account wasn't as secret as you thought. I found evidence of it months before you left. I never confronted you because deep down, I knew you were right to have it. It was your lifeboat, and I was the sinking ship. I drove to the storage facility that afternoon, using the key to open a small unit filled with boxes. True to his word, Marcus had saved things I thought were lost forever. My father's watch, which I'd believed he had sold, photo albums from my childhood he'd claimed were accidentally thrown away, my grandmother's first letters to me about the inheritance, which he'd hidden to prevent me from understanding my options. But it was the journals that held me captive for hours. Pages and pages of Marcus's attempts to understand himself, to deconstruct the toxic beliefs that had driven his behavior. The evolution of his thinking was painful to witness, each insight coming too late to repair the damage he'd caused. The final box contained the trust documentation. He had been contributing 70% of his income for 2 years, living on barely enough to survive while funding scholarships for women escaping situations, like the one he'd created. The current balance was modest by my standards, but represented enormous sacrifice by his. That evening, I convened an emergency board meeting of the Watercolor Society. The scholarship committee needed to know about this unexpected funding source and decide how to handle it. The debate was intense, with some members feeling we shouldn't accept money from an abuser, even a reformed one. Patricia, ever the voice of wisdom, offered a different perspective. This money represents accountability. Marcus can't undo the harm he caused, Elena, but he can prevent similar harm to others. Refusing it doesn't punish him. He's gone. It only denies resources to women who need them. In the end, we voted to accept the trust, using it to fund emergency extraction services for women whose hidden accounts had been discovered by controlling partners. The Marcus Anderson Emergency Fund, though his name would never be publicly attached, would help women in the most dangerous phase of leaving, when discovery could lead to escalation. The Watercolor Society had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. Chapters existed in 50 cities across 12 countries, each adapting our model to local cultures and legal systems. The app had been downloaded over 1 million times, its true purpose hidden behind layers of legitimate art instruction that also happened to teach financial literacy. Dr. Elena Chen had published a groundbreaking study on financial abuse, using anonymized data from our members to demonstrate the prevalence and patterns of economic control in relationships. Her research had influenced policy changes in several states, making financial abuse grounds for restraining orders and divorce settlements that recognized economic manipulation as a form of domestic violence. But the most remarkable growth had been in Chen International's impact on women's economic independence globally. We had launched a supplier diversity program that prioritized women-owned businesses, creating a ripple effect that had lifted thousands of female entrepreneurs. Our factories had become models for workplace gender equity, with on-site childcare, flexible scheduling, and advancement programs that had promoted women to positions of leadership throughout the organization. Lenway, now my chosen successor as CEO, brought a proposal that would take our mission even further. She wanted to create Chen Ventures, a venture capital fund focused exclusively on women-led startups in developing economies. The board will resist, she warned during our planning session. The old guard still thinks our focus on women's advancement is a distraction from profit maximization. I smiled, thinking of how far we'd come from the days when those same board members had resisted my appointment. Let them resist. Our stock price has tripled since we made gender equity central to our mission. Turns out, investing in women is excellent business. The fund launched with $1 billion commitment, making it one of the largest women-focused venture funds in the world. But we structured it differently from traditional VC funds. Instead of requiring entrepreneurs to give up control for funding, we offered patient capital and mentorship, allowing founders to maintain ownership while building sustainable businesses. The first investment went to a collective of women in Bangladesh who had been secretly saving money to start a textile cooperative. Their story echoed my own, women who had hidden small amounts over years until they had enough to declare their independence. With our funding and support, they built a factory that employed 300 women from their community, all earning living wages with profit-sharing agreements. Success stories multiplied across continents. A group of former domestic workers in Brazil used our funding to create a cleaning service empire that provided benefits and equity ownership to all employees. Women in Kenya built a mobile banking platform specifically designed for those hiding money from abusive partners, with security features that made secret accounts safer and more accessible. Each success created opportunities for more women to build their own economic power. But the work wasn't without challenges. We faced pushback from traditional power structures that saw women's economic independence as a threat. Some governments tried to regulate our programs out of existence. Conservative groups accused us of destroying families by encouraging women to have financial autonomy. Men's rights activists targeted our meetings and online platforms with harassment campaigns. The most painful opposition sometimes came from women themselves, those so deeply entrenched in systems of control that they saw our work as dangerous. I received letters from women accusing me of ruining marriages, of encouraging deception, of promoting selfishness over family value. To these critics, I always responded with the same message: financial independence isn't about leaving relationships, it's about having the choice to stay or leave, based on love and respect rather than economic necessity. A partnership built on mutual independence is stronger than one built on dependence and control. 5 years after Marcus's death, I stood before the United Nations General Assembly, delivering a speech on women's economic empowerment. The girl who had once trembled while buying art supplies with her husband's permission was now addressing world leaders about the importance of financial autonomy for global development. Economic abuse is a silent epidemic, I told the assembly. It crosses all borders, affects all social classes, and traps millions of women in situations they cannot escape. The solution isn't charity or rescue, it's systemic change that recognizes women's right to control their own economic future. I shared statistics from our programs, showed videos of women whose lives had been transformed by financial independence, and challenged world leaders to examine how their own policies either enabled or prevented women's economic autonomy. The speech was broadcast globally, translated into dozens of languages, and shared millions of times on social media. But the moment that mattered most came afterward, when a young diplomat from Saudi Arabia approached me privately. "My sister needs help," she whispered. "She's been building a secret account, but her husband is becoming suspicious. Can the Watercolor Society help someone in Riyadh?" We could, and we did. Our network had learned to operate across cultural and legal boundaries, adapting our methods to help women in even the most restrictive environments. Technology became our ally, with encrypted communications and digital currencies providing pathways to freedom that hadn't existed in my grandmother's generation. Chen International's transformation continued to ripple outward. We acquired struggling companies, not for their assets, but for their workforces, converting them to employee-owned cooperatives, with women in leadership roles. Our supply chain became a network of women-owned businesses, supporting each other across continents. What had started as one woman's secret rebellion had become a global movement of economic liberation. The art studio in Boston remained my sanctuary, though I rarely had time to paint anymore. But once a month, I still taught a watercolor class for beginners. These weren't Watercolor Society meetings, just genuine art instruction for anyone who wanted to learn. It grounded me, reminded me of where the journey had begun. One evening, a new student joined the class, a woman in her 30s, who held her brush with the uncertain grip of someone trying something entirely new. As I demonstrated color mixing techniques, I noticed her wedding ring, the way she checked her phone nervously, the cash payment she offered apologetically. I accepted her money without comment, recognizing the signs I'd once displayed myself. After class, as she gathered her supplies, I handed her a business card, not for the Watercolor Society, just for Patricia's bank. "In case you ever need to open your own account," I said quietly. "For your art supplies, of course." Her eyes widened with understanding and perhaps relief at being seen. She took the card with trembling fingers, nodding silently before hurrying out. I didn't know if she would use it, but I had planted the seed. The rest was up to her. As I cleaned up the studio, I thought about all the seeds that had been planted over the years. Some grew quickly into mighty trees of independence. Others remained dormant for years before suddenly sprouting. Some never grew at all, the soil of circumstance too hostile for change. But each seed planted increased the chances that somewhere, a woman would find the courage to claim her economic freedom. My phone buzzed with a message from Lily in Hong Kong. Another billion-dollar milestone for Chen Ventures. Another 1,000 women employed by our portfolio company. Another step toward a world where secret accounts were unnecessary, because women's financial autonomy was assumed, rather than forbidden. The numbers were staggering when I allowed myself to think about them. Millions of women touched by our program. Billions of dollars shifted from control to independence. Entire economies influenced by our commitment to gender equity. But the number that mattered most was still one woman at a time discovering she deserved financial freedom, one account at a time building toward independence, one choice at a time rejecting control for autonomy. The journey from my first secret deposit to this moment had been longer than I could have imagined, and shorter than it seemed. In retrospect, every challenge had taught necessary lessons, every setback had revealed new strategy, every success had created opportunities to lift others. Marcus had been wrong about many things, but he had been right about one. I had been planning something from the moment I opened that first account, not my escape specifically, but my transformation. The woman who made that first deposit had been planting seeds of possibility, without fully understanding what would grow from them. Now surrounded by the forest that had grown from those seeds, I understood my grandmother's final lesson. The money had never been the point. The independence it represented had been the goal, and that independence, once achieved, became a responsibility to help others find their own. Chen International would continue growing. The Watercolor Society would keep expanding, and Chen Ventures would fund more women-led businesses. But the real legacy would be measured in the women who woke up tomorrow knowing they had options, who went to sleep tonight planning their futures, who right now were making their first deposits into accounts that represented hope rather than deception. My own secret account still existed, maintained as a symbol rather than necessity. The balance remained small, just enough to remember the woman who had started with nothing but determination and a grandmother's wisdom. Sometimes I would log in just to see it, to remember that every empire begins with a single action, every revolution starts with one person refusing to accept limitations. As I left the studio that night, Boston's skyline glittered with the promises of a million dreams being pursued. Somewhere in those lights were women counting their hidden savings, planning their escapes, building their futures, each one carrying forward the legacy of financial independence that my grandmother had envisioned, and I had been privileged to help create. The secret was out now, shared freely with anyone who needed it. Financial independence wasn't just possible for women, it was essential, not just for individual freedom, but for the transformation of societies that had for too long been built on the assumption of women's economic dependence. The revolution my grandmother had started with a textile shop in Shanghai had become a global movement. The seeds she had planted in her granddaughter had grown into forests of possibility for millions of women. The secret account that had once been my shame had become my strength, and then my gift to others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women needing help, new battles against those who profited from control. But tonight I felt the satisfaction of promises kept and potential realized. My grandmother's little sparrow had indeed learned to fly, and in flying had helped countless others discover their own wings. The secret to financial independence had never really been a secret at all. It was simply the radical act of believing women deserved to control their own economic destinies. Once that belief took hold, everything else followed. One woman, one account, one choice at a time. The world was changed, and somewhere in Shanghai, I knew my grandmother was smiling, watching her legacy unfold in ways she had dreamed but never quite imagined. The revolution continued, no longer secret but triumphant, carried forward by every woman who refused to accept that her worth was determined by anyone but herself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.